I woke up one morning in Iraq, first cup of coffee, walked into the Tactile Operations Center, and one of my team leaders, Jamie, said, "Hey, boss, we've got a problem." And that was a typical thing to be expected with that first morning cup of coffee. And he said, "Boss, Sergeant Major Saran called. One of his nieces and one of his nephews has been kidnapped by Al-Qaeda, and they're being held ransom. And there's an exorbitant price that they're asking, and he's not going to be able to meet it. He's asking for our help to go find these kids." So I called my boss. I said, "Hey, boss, this is the situation. We got to help Sergeant Major Saran to go find these kids." My boss said, "No, man, that's not the business we're in. We're not in the business of rescuing Iraqi or Kurdish children. We're in the business of winning this war, fighting Al-Qaeda and ISIS." And I understood where he was coming from. I totally understood where he was coming from. I said, "Got it, boss." I hung up the phone. And I sat down with a couple guys on the team, and they said, "We got to go get these kids." I met these kids. I played with these kids. So these kids weren't just something in a phone call. These were little kids. This was a little boy, a 9-year-old boy and a 10-year-old girl that I had met and that I had known. But I also understood we were part of the machine. There was a war going on. It had been going on for 4 years. It was going to go on for 4 or 5 more. So I called my boss. I said, "Hey, boss, here's the deal. Sergeant Major Saran has been a partner with ours. He's been fighting with us for years, and he's going to continue to fight with us. And applying some assets to get these kids will build rapport, and he's going to owe us one. Give us 24 hours to try to find these kids." So I wasn't appealing to my boss's humanity. I was appealing to how he understood and what our jobs were and what our duty was and what our responsibility was. And it fit into his paradigm. So he said, "Got it. You've got 24 hours. I'll give you the assets that you need. Find these kids." And we went to work. And for 24 hours, we hunted and we hunted and we hunted with every asset that you can imagine. We had satellites. We were trying to understand and ingest every technology piece that we had. We were scouring human intelligence all over the place. We hit target after target after target. We couldn't find these kids. We went back to the TOC. We started reviewing all of the imagery. And then we noticed something that we had missed before. These guys were unloading these bags of rice and other produce from a place and loading and putting them into trucks. And we were looking very closely, and we saw one of the bags move. Rice doesn't usually move when you transport it. So we realized, we saw that earlier, but we missed it. So now we had to go through the process again and following all that video and where did that truck go? And that was the thing that helped us. We were able to see and find both of these little kids and recover them. And I know those kids today. I can go visit them in Kurdistan today. They're alive today because I was able to talk to my bosses and help him understand and recognize the humanity that's there. And I'm in this transition too. I've been retired for 8 years now, and I'm still learning how to transition from being this machine-like piece of hardware to more human. And if you guys get a chance to meet my wife, you can ask her how I'm doing. In Special Operations Forces, we have 5 soft truths, and I think they're very applicable for open source intelligence. The one that I'm going to hammer away today and really chip away at is humans are more important than hardware. That's the first one. The other 4 go things like quality is more important than quantity. You can't create soft forces after the emergency has occurred. Soft forces often require conventional support. So when you apply some of this idea, even with OSINT, I think it's a 1-for-1. People think OSINT is easy, right? Because my mom does it when she checks on my son's girlfriends to find out what quality they are. There's a level of OSINT that everybody does. But as a profession, you cannot create OSINT professionals after the emergency occurred. And quantity isn't what we're looking for. We're looking for quality. And as we develop this profession in OSINT, that's that fine line we're going to have to continue to draw. And then this idea that it's going to require other elements of intelligence and information and integration as well. That's all part of it. But I also want to make sure that we're not losing track of this idea that the humans are more important than hardware. And many of you are going to get an opportunity to meet our team from Skull Games. And we leverage and apply all of the technology that is available to us. But it's really this team. It's the team that we've built and the unity and the shared vision and the shared mission that really gets things done. And we have survivors on our team that have come out of the life of trafficking. And they're faster than facial recognition. And they're faster than AI and machine learning because they've got this lived experience. So I've gone through this time in my life where I read history and I live my life in the current, and then I look forward. So that's what I'm going to do today in this discussion. I'm going to tell you a few stories from my life. I'm going to go way back to some stories that shaped me from thousands of years ago. And then I want to hear a couple of stories from y'all right here in this room, because in a strange way, we're all interconnected. And when I say humans, okay, humans are more important than hardware, what is it that you're thinking of? I'll tell you what I hope you're not thinking of is this. I hope you're not thinking of this definition, that a human is nothing but a bipedal primate, a Homo sapien. I know one of you in this room is thinking that, because some of these weirdos in here that are working in OSINT, they really see the world in black and white. When I said human, if the word bipedal even popped into your head, please see me after this, because I want to talk to you. I want to get to know you. But there is a time and place to simply understand and recognize that what is in front of me is only a bipedal Homo sapien. And that's one of the ways that I coped as a soldier. I could understand and recognize the humanity of these children. I could understand and recognize the humanity of my partners. And most of the time, I understood and recognized the humanity of the men that I was fighting against. But there are those times where they become nothing but bipedal Homo sapiens to me, because we're all part of the hardware. We're all part of the machine. When you think of hardware, there's a lot of different definitions of hardware as well. And there are times where we're just a cog in the machine, right? How often in your life do you feel like when you're at work, I'm just a cog in the machine? This is one of those definitions. There's a lot of definitions for hardware. A couple more that I like that I don't have on there is when people win a gold medal, they call that hardware. When people are awarded things like a crown or some accoutrement, that's your hardware. We didn't call the hardware that we would put on as we would prepare to go out and fight hardware. We called it kit. But we had a very systematic way of moving from Jeff drinking a cup of coffee to Jeff, who is now on the battlefield. And it was a ritual. And that ritual we all did together. We would put on our body armor. We would put on our helmets. We would load our magazines and our weapons. We would strap our rifles, get our radio set. And when I stepped outside of that door, out of that team room, and moved to a helicopter or moved to a vehicle, I was not the same person. Not at all. And even when I tell some of these stories, when I tell stories of what happened in Iraq and Afghanistan, it doesn't even feel like me. It feels like I'm a third person telling a story about somebody else. And in many ways it is, because that was a whole different character and chapter in my life. But I'm able to look at it now, how I had that ritual that I would move from one person to the other. I'm a jiu-jitsu guy now. And there's no-gi jiu-jitsu, which is wearing kind of like your underpants and a tight shirt. It has its own value, right? Some of you think that's attractive. I got it. I like the gi jiu-jitsu. It's a heavy jacket, heavy pants, and you tie a belt around your waist. And I like the gi jiu-jitsu, one, because I'm getting older, I'm getting weaker, I'm getting frail. There's a lot of young men in here that I wouldn't want to fight just in my underpants. But in a nice heavy jacket with a belt, I'll take anybody on. But the other reason that I like gi jiu-jitsu is because it's part of a ritual. I show up at the gym, I take off my street clothes, I put on the gi, and that act of tying the belt, I turn into somebody else. I turn into something else, another character of myself. So one of the things I'm trying to get at as we talk about, as I have this opportunity to talk with you all have your own rituals in the morning on your way to work. You have your own rituals while you're at work and on your way home. But what's the one that breaks down the most? The one coming home. And we carry work home with us. And we have that difficulty with that transition. I have a story where we deployed one day, and the way we would do it, we often left at night, and I would drive in at night. So we would have that last day of memories with the kids. I would try to fill it with memories. It was something fun. It was quite often when it was nice out, it was tag or ball tag or, jungle gyms, all sorts of activities. My boys were maybe 10, 11, 12 at the time, a little bit younger. And we'd tuck them in at night. I'd say goodbye to my wife, and I'd head on into work. One day, for one reason or another, I don't even remember specifically, we were leaving during the day. So my wife and kids came with me, and we drove this 24-mile stretch between where I lived and where we were going to deploy, where my unit was. And somewhere along that line, my two boys in the back of the car began to realize and recognize, oh, Dad's leaving. And they were old enough to understand and recognize what war meant. They had seen me come and go, but they understood and recognized every time. And they started to cry in that back seat. Even as I tell you this story, my heart aches. And they cried, and they cried. And we got to work, and we opened the door, and I was giving them their final hugs, and I was walking towards the back bay, and one boy was on one leg, and one boy was on the other leg, and I was dragging them. And they were saying, Daddy, don't go. Daddy, don't go. To this day, it's one of the hardest memories that I have. But it's taken me this much time. I don't know what year that was. That was at least 10 years ago. But I wrote about it, and I was writing about it. And I realized a couple things that I didn't realize at the time. They broke my ritual. It wasn't just the process of my sons crying. I didn't realize that part of my ritual was that half an hour from leaving my house and slowly turning into that soldier who was now going to be deployed and wholly focused on combat. They broke that ritual. That was part of it I didn't realize at the time. But you know what was worse? I didn't realize at the time until I stood at my home writing this story that of the 20-ish times that I deployed, every single time my boys realized I was leaving or I was gone, and they broke down, and they cried. And who carried that burden for me? My wife. And I never once thanked her. I didn't even recognize it. I didn't even appreciate the fact that I was becoming this piece of hardware moving into the war machine. She was picking up all of these pieces of humanity. I've thanked her a couple times, but you can never thank someone enough for something like that. So when we talk about human also, it isn't this bipedal Homo sapien, right? We're really thinking about self. When we think about human, we think about all of these things, these emotions, these thoughts, these sensations. And one of the things that I think of is vulnerabilities. In the military, you do vulnerability assessments. You figure out how it is you can attack the enemy, either physically, personally, or the structure that they're coming from. We're constantly looking for these vulnerabilities. And vulnerabilities are such a part of the human condition. And much of my life, I have thought that I was invulnerable. And to be a good soldier, to be a good commando, to be a good special operations soldier, you have to feel invulnerable. But it's taking me years and years to open up my vulnerabilities again and share those with people, to include my wife, who I met at 15 years old. We're high school sweethearts. We got married at 19. We've been married for 35 years now. She knows everything about me. I think she probably knows more things about me. She knows my vulnerabilities. And she, only after the fact, just like I'm learning more, is beginning to understand how I move between being a human and just being a piece of the hardware. And that's something that we struggle with Skull Games too. I hope many of you are going to get an opportunity to play with us this afternoon and tonight. What we are looking at in Skull Games is absolutely disgusting. It is absolutely degrading. So we have to jump between the humanity of it and just being a piece of the hardware. So how do you do that? You build teams. You build teams that are cohesive. Why do we wear uniforms? So we can identify with things. We take one piece of clothing off and we put on another. So a uniform is important. It has a sense of unity. You develop your own dialogue, the way you talk. You develop acronyms. You develop shortcuts on communicating. You get behind a shared vision and mission, and you build these teams, and you build these teams. And you help understand and recognize what each person has as a strength and what each person has as a weakness, and you try to be open with those vulnerabilities. But the thing that we have found with these traffickers is they are really good. They are great at the game. They can spot a vulnerability 100 meters away. One of the things I'd like to do with y'all, you all have an unfortunate cookie or a misfortune cookie on your desk. Usually we open these up and we're excited to see what's happening in my future. Well, this thing is 180 degrees different. Okay, you're going to open up this thing and you're going to look at it and you're going to think about something in your past. So you can take a look at them. I'm not going to ask you until the end of this discussion. But as you're reading this misfortune cookie, this unfortunate cookie, I'm going to ask a couple people to be bold, and I'm going to have you stand up. You're going to read out your cookie, and you're going to tell me a little bit of your story. And what I'm looking at is some of these vulnerabilities. I've shared a little bit of man, this guy, he ate the cookie in one failed swoop. That was impressive, brother. Yeah. Did you take the misfortune out, or did you swallow that? Because we'll look for it later. So I'll come back to that, but that's why those are at your desk. Again, I'm a student of history. I'm a student of science. And one of the reasons that I was able to be successful on the battlefield was I studied history. I studied my enemy. I studied it from every angle possible. I learned about Erickson's stages of development in high school and in college psychology, but I was just recently reacquainted to this, and I started looking at this and trying to apply some of these different concepts to what we do with trafficking, some of these different concepts of where am I in life. Now, these stages are supposed to be fairly consistent with ages and years. You start off as an infant, you go to 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, as you're moving here along this left side of the circle, you're getting older. And I don't even really care about that. Erickson has all these stages, and it's interesting to look at. But when I look at this thing, I look at these phases of my life and how I've been on that cycle, and it's kind of been smooth, and then I go backwards. And then you can see those lines where they're jumping across. You jump from one to the other to the other. I'm going to share an old story, ancient story, and it really has shaped my life. And many of you know this story, and there may be some aspects to it that you haven't heard of before, but this is a story, this is a man that I modeled my life after. I learned about him when I was a young boy. There was this man named David. This is a story that was written, he lived over 3,000 years ago. This story is a 3,000-year-old story that we've been telling over and over and over. And many of you know this story because he ultimately kills a giant. So we know this guy, David and Goliath. But the story that preceded that, he was the youngest of 7 brothers. So what type of psychological manipulation and bullying do you think he had to go through as the youngest of 7 brothers? He was also the runt of the litter. He was a little guy. And I can relate to that. Oh, I know, I felt it. Whenever someone talks about a Delta Force dude and I come up on stage, they're just like, seriously? That guy? I thought he'd be bigger. I know, I get it, I could feel it. I'm a runt. Interestingly, many of us are. And I don't know if that's a whole psychological another experiment. Are we trying to make up for being little guys? I think really in reality, when you're in a job that is really physical and intensive, the bigger you are, the harder you fall. You've got to feed that machine. I have a nice little machine that doesn't take a whole lot of water or food or carrying. Let me get back to David. So that was one thing I could relate to David. He was the runt of the litter. This land that he lived in, they had a king. They created a king. His name was Saul. Saul wasn't doing a good job. And if you know the story, you know why Saul was selected? Because he was a tall, good-looking guy. He was the biggest man in the country. And he did okay in the beginning, but then along his route and his time, he began to falter and fall. So the prophets of the day end up anointing David, when he was a little kid, he is told, you will be the king. And then the story waits and waits and waits. I can relate to things like that. Because in 2011, I felt really called into this space of counter-sex trafficking. I didn't even know really what it was. I had seen it overseas, here and there. It wasn't what I had set out to do. It wasn't what my wife had set out to do. But I really felt like that was my next responsibility. And as I looked at the things that I had done in the military, building teams, getting this operations intelligence integration, and just hunting bad men, that's the thing that turns me on more than anything. There are good guys and there are bad guys. It will always be that way. The people that wear me out are the ones in the middle, the apathetic. So I felt very strongly that this was my next duty, to combat sex trafficking right here in the United States. And I've been on this journey for 8 years, and it has not been easy. It hasn't gone the way that I had thought. Very, very difficult to get the support and funding to do something that is so essential in our society. But I get comfort when I read these ancient stories. David was supposed to be a king, and he finds himself out there as a shepherd. And then things happen to him. We know through his story, he's confronted with a lion, he's confronted with a bear. And those are just little lines in the story. David kills a lion, David kills a bear. But when you think of those from the human perspective, from the human level, do you think David felt like he was being tested and developed for something bigger and greater? No, I'm sure that lion and that bear took some of his sheep, and he might have got scuffed up. So just like the rest of us, he's going, what is happening? There was supposed to be something different for my life. Why are you sending lions and bears into my life to take the things that I love? Then the story jumps again. He's in the fields watching the shepherds, and his father comes to him and says, David, your brothers, three of his oldest brothers, they were off at war. And they'd been there for a couple months, probably a month and a half at least. And David shows up with some food for them, about a 7-mile walk from where he lived. And he shows up to give his brothers the food, and they're just like, beat it, kid. And he kind of stands around on the fringes, and then he hears the morning ritual begins. And the soldiers get ready for battle, and they put on their kit, and they begin that ritual that just like I am very familiar with. And a giant man steps out on one of the sides and begins to berate and challenge David's brothers and the people that he worked with. So oftentimes in ancient warfare, instead of having tens and hundreds and thousands of deaths, they would pit one man against another. And for 40 days, this giant would come forward and taunt the other side. And David, this little runt, he looked around and said, what's going on here? How come no one is taking this guy on? I'll do it. So you got to give him confidence, right? Not really sure where David is on this Erickson stage of development, but he's certainly well beyond the confidence stage. And the king puts his armor on, puts his helmet on David, and it doesn't fit. David has to go back to what he knows. And he's a sniper with a slingshot. And most of you know this story. David confronts Goliath, 1 shot, 1 kill in the forehead, and he becomes celebrated. And Saul loves him. And David moves into the palace with Saul, and he becomes his assistant, and everything looks like it's on track. And then Saul begins to get jealous, and he even tries to kill David. Now David's on the run, and he's got his band of men that are working with him. He's got 30 men that are really his close. He's got 70 that are pretty good. He's got another couple hundred. He's got about 400 people, and he's on the run. And one of these other stories, while David is on the run, that I really relate to, is he's sitting around with his guys, and he flippantly says one day, man, I sure could go for some of that water from the well from where I grew up. Just kind of says it offhandedly. And a couple of his guys see it and recognize it, and they love David, and they respect David because he's leading from the front. He's a warrior. He has character. He has integrity. He's everything that a strong leader should be. And he's built a team around him that is unified and focused. And a couple of his guys go to Bethlehem, and it's behind enemy lines. So they sneak through enemy lines, and they get a picture of this sweet water from the well, and they bring it to David. And David is aghast. He pours the water out. And he says, I can't drink this. You guys risked your lives just to get me a drink of water. And he realizes in that moment that words matter. He realizes this relationship that he's built, this teamwork that he's built, the littlest thing he says matters. I read this story when I was a young boy. I read it again and again and again, and it had different meanings for me all throughout my life. But as a leader in the military, I recognized and understood my words matter. And when you build a team that is unified and respects you, and you build a team based on mutual respect and even love, you have to be super, super careful. And of course, as a father, you learn that in spades. David's story continues. He does become the king eventually. And now there's another story many of you know. The story says it's the spring season, it's time to go off for war. And David stays home. First mistake. Why wasn't he at war with his men? You look at Erickson's stages here. I think he's stuck somewhere here in generativity versus stagnation. Maybe he's looking for love. Maybe as he's getting older and he's no longer the warrior that he used to be, maybe he's going through that identity confusion. I'm not sure, but he's stuck there somewhere. So he goes for a walk in the late afternoon after a nap, right? It's good to be the king, napping in the afternoon. He's walking along the top of the rooftop of his palace, and he sees a young lady bathing. And he knows who that woman is. She's the wife of one of his best friends. And he calls her in. Does she come? Yes, she does. Why? Because he's the king. She comes because he's the king, and she doesn't feel like she has any other recourse at her disposal. I don't know what that relationship was like, if it was forced or not, but she gets pregnant, and David finds out about it, so he tries to cover it up. He recalls her husband from the front lines and says, hey, man, I got some things to talk about. They're good friends. He says, go home, hang out with your wife, have dinner, come back and see me in a little bit. Guy's like, no, man. Let's do some business. Let's get down to business. David gets him drunk, says, hey, man, go home. Hang out with your wife. We'll send you back to the front line. This man says, no, because he has integrity. He says, I can't go and enjoy my wife and comfort and food and wine while my men are on the front lines. He refuses. So he goes back to the front lines. David sends a message to his commander, and he has this man murdered. And he thinks he gets away with it. He brings the woman into his home, and he's going to raise that child as his own. And everyone thinks David is a great man. Until a prophet shows up and says, I've got a story for you. Tell me what you think about this. There's this guy. He's got flocks and flocks and flocks of sheep. Hundreds of sheep. Can barely count them. And there's this other guy who has one. He has one sheep. And the rich guy who has all the sheep, a friend comes to visit, and he doesn't want to sacrifice one of his sheep. So he takes the man who has one, and he kills it, and they eat it at the banquet. What do you think of that? What kind of character does a guy like that have? And David says, that's a terrible man. He should be put to death. And then this prophet says to David, you are that man. And one of the things, as I read history and I look at David, you can identify as David in many ways. But also that conviction of you are that man is something that I have to take seriously as well. Because I'm on this path I'm on this journey. I'm probably up there in that top quarter, which is integrity versus despair and wisdom. And one of the things I am guarding my life from is continuing to be like David. So I take comfort in this idea. I've done some bad things in my life, but I never had an adulterous affair with my best friend and then had a murder to cover it up. So I take comfort in these old stories, as should you. Hopefully you guys understand and recognize the history of where you come from and your families. We do a really good job of that in the military, understanding who we are and who came before us. Another story that I have with this validation and this understanding is we jumped into Panama in 1989. And when you jump into combat, you get this little gold star on your wings to denote that you parachuted into combat. But some of us afterwards, we didn't feel worthy. Now, I honestly don't remember which side of the coin I was on. I was in the Ranger Battalion at the time. We were relatively young men, all of us in our early 20s. And some of the guys were saying, I'm not wearing that thing. We don't deserve this thing. Because the people that we were holding ourselves against was these men that jumped into Normandy, these men that jumped into Market Garden, these men that died by the hundreds and thousands and parachuted to their death, or the Mac V SOG men from Vietnam, where an entire team would halo out of an aircraft never to be seen again. So that was the standard and the level that we were measuring ourselves up against, and we didn't feel like we measured up. And we had this debate for months. And then on D-Day commemoration in June, there were some old World War II guys that came to visit us. And I'll never forget this guy, old guy sitting in a wheelchair. And we said to him, hey, we're kind of having a debate. Some of us think we should wear this because it happened, we did it, we were awarded it. And some of us think we're just not worthy of it. And this little old man, he said, did you guys know what was going to be on the drop zone? And we said, well, no, not really. I mean, we knew there'd be some resistance. He said, yeah, but did you know? Did you know fully what you were jumping into? And we had to admit, no, we did not. And he said, would it have mattered? And we admitted, no, it would not have mattered. And that's when he paused for dramatic effect. And he said, that's why you wear that award. Not because what was actually expected of you, but because it would not have mattered. You willfully jumped into something you didn't know, and it didn't matter what the end result was. And to this day, I will wear that bronze star on my jump wings with pride. And I think all of these things that I'm talking about, I hope you're relating to your own lives. There is a time to be a piece of the hardware. There is a time to focus on the humanity. There is a time to recognize and identify that you're just part of the machine. There is a time to understand and recognize that maybe your expectations are too high and just being there is good enough. Maybe you have your own cautionary tales throughout life. And when I read David and I see these men all around me not finishing well, having sex with children, cheating on their taxes, doing X, Y, and Z, we have an epidemic in America where older men do not finish well. And that is a vulnerability that I'm trying to fix by surrounding myself with people and continuing to stay on task and stay on mission. And Skull Games is a safety boat, a life raft for me as much as it is for these girls that we're trying to protect. So let's go back to this unfortunate cookie, because I want to unwrap a couple things. Because one of the things as we're working through, when we would go out on a target, we had the intelligence, and it was very, very specific of what it was we were looking for. But I also, as the wars went on and we recognized and realized, we aren't going to win these wars. Midway through Iraq and midway through Afghanistan, those of us that were fighting, we recognized we weren't going to win the war. But that was never my job. My job was to win the battle. And we were willing to put our lives in harm's way. But I developed this concept called a compelling story. So in addition to the intel, I wanted to understand what was compelling about this target. Because if you were one of my guys, you fully recognized and understood, we're not going to win this war, but this is why we're going out on this target. And it really was reduced dramatically, especially in Afghanistan those last couple of years, that the units that I was with, all of the equipment we had and the training and the precision and the teamwork, my job was not to win the war. It was simply to protect those other American and foreign partners that worked with us that lived on the ground. I became a protector simply for them. That did include capturing and killing Taliban and other aspects of it. The same idea of being in Iraq. As the war came to an end, things shifted. So that compelling story is also something that we build with Skull Games. Law enforcement needs information. They need evidence. We need to give them enough to go past that threshold of probable cause, reasonable suspicion, and that's something they can start digging into. But they're overworked. A compelling story goes a long ways. And that's that balance that we work through on and off as we build packets. And you guys are going to recognize and identify that if you play along with us later this afternoon and tomorrow. We need to know who that girl is. Where did she come from? What makes her tick? How did she end up where she ended up? Because these traffickers have it figured out. And it's why we're called Skull Games. We have to beat them at their own game. There's a pimp known who went by the name of Iceberg Slim. He used to say, pimping isn't a sex game, it's a skull game. And that's one of the ways I survived on battlefield also. I understood I was a piece of the machine. Sometimes I visualized myself as a piece of the machine. And sometimes I visualized myself as just being in a grand game. A high-stakes game of life and death, no doubt, but a game. And I was moving my pieces, and our opponents were moving their pieces. And every single one of you are in the game, especially our younger kids. As I go back here quickly to this one here, our younger kids. There is all sorts of manipulation and exploitation that these guys are looking for. Some of us are aged out of the game, right? Nobody wants this anymore. But the market to purchase our young people for personal pleasure is through the roof. So I'm going to ask a couple of you here, just a couple minutes, or right now, just spend a couple minutes, to share something off your misfortune card. I want to hear from you, and I want you to be vulnerable. And if you don't want to be vulnerable, then don't stand up, okay? I want to hear something off of that unfortunate card, and I want to just talk about it, just real briefly. Who's going to be brave? Who wants to stand up? And if we can get them a microphone. I like it. Brave. What's your name, buddy? Tom? All right. Tom, what did your unfortunate cookie say?
It says, I am not blank enough.
Yeah.
I am not strong enough.
I am not strong enough.
I know you look at me, you're like, Tom, but you've got it going on, dude. Just look at you.
That wasn't my first thought, Tom, but I'll go with you. For the sake of the discussion, I'll go with it.
Yes. Self-confidence is not something I'm lacking. No, not physical strength, emotional, mental.
Yeah.
I can trace all my successes back to being strong enough, all of my failures back to being not strong enough. So that's something that I carry with me every day.
Thank you. Can anyone relate to that? Yeah. It's another exercise I do with folks, is that exact word right there. I am not blank enough. How many girls do you think say they're not pretty enough or smart enough? How many boys think you say that they're not strong enough or smart enough? Almost all of them. You think these predators out there don't know that? You think these predators out there don't know what that vulnerability is? And that's the thing that they're going to poke at? Because they don't look at you as a human at all. They look at you as a piece of the hardware that's going to be integrated into their machine. But they understand your humanity. They understand your weakness. And what's diabolical about them is they understand the cycle of development. a young person begins to separate themselves from their family. It's the natural thing. They begin to move out onto their own and figure out their own identity and their independence, and they test things out. Boys and girls begin to develop sexually, and they begin to look for those things on Erickson stages, specifically love and intimacy. And these predators are there waiting and pretending to give it to you. But they're not looking at you as a human. And unfortunately, too often when we look at these girls and women that are trapped in the sex industry, we don't look at them as human. We either don't see them at all, or we look at them as a piece of the hardware that's trapped in something that we don't even want to look at. Who else wants to share something? That was good, Tom. Come on, let me get one more brave person. Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Something I keep to myself is the types of predators and where you might find them is not something that I would share with my professional or even private circles.
Expand on that. I didn't quite follow. So your cookie says the things that
Something I keep to myself
Yes, okay.
is the types of predators that are out there
Yeah.
and where they are found.
Why do you keep that to yourself?
Because it's shocking and it's unbelievable and it's demoralizing to go out in society and find predators in places you would never expect to find them.
Yeah. That's a balance that we have to strike with what it is we do. And it was something that was a tension that we always had in the wars also. Like, we're inside the enemy's communication, we understand who they are, we understand what it is they're saying, but how and when do we act on that? Because we don't want them to know that we know. So that's a tension we're always in with Skull Games as well, is how much do we reveal of the techniques, tactics, and procedures that we know? But our default is we've got to let you know. We've got to let you know where it is. We've got to help you to face it. And we'll share everything we have. And that's why we've built the task force around Skull Games. We're able to invite hundreds and hundreds of people in to participate and refine their skills at this. Let me get one more, then we'll call it a day. Yep.
Morning. So I'm going to go through and tell a lesson that I learned working in OSINT, and kind of as a cautionary tale. Mine was I was humiliated when. So I've worked in OSINT for the last 10 years, and about 5 years ago, or about 4 years ago, there was an assessment that my team and I were doing, and it was one of a group that we were looking for, and I totally got the wrong scent. Right, I went down the wrong rabbit trail. I tracked this other person's social media information. I got this person. I said, this is them. Took it back to the team, and they said, you're wrong. And after looking at it, I was like, they're right. I was wrong in regards to this stuff. So I took it, and I was humiliated. No one else remembers that except for me. But the point was that I learned from that, and now I have the ability to go through and kind of dissect where my phases of OSINT going to go into, and then actually making sure that I'm vocal with my team or whoever I'm bouncing ideas off of to make sure that I'm on the right path. Because I can't do it alone. But at the same time, if I didn't have that experience, I wouldn't have been, able to go through and move forward with that stuff. So,
What was your name? Thank you for sharing.
I don't have a name.
Okay.
No, I'm just kidding.
Yep.
Michael James.
Michael, stay standing, because I'm going to push you on one more.
I don't want to do this.
Tell me, you were brave, you're a big guy, you stood up.
Whoa, big guy.
Tell
Come
me,
on now.
tell me another time that you were humiliated, not professionally, but you as a man.
It's every day I wake up. No. There's a lot of humiliation, wherever, because I tend to try to take everything and wear it on my sleeve for a lot of stuff. If I'm invested, I'm invested, right? I have a daughter. She's older now, but there's a lot of times where, because when we grew up, it was just me and her. There would be a lot of incidences where we drop it off at school or something else like that, however, and there was always going to be other things that she wanted to go through and do we couldn't afford, or things she wanted to wear that we couldn't afford, or places she wanted to go. So I always tried to make sure that she was able to go through and get everything she could. But it was really humiliating to go through and to hear her talking on the phone to other people about stuff that I wasn't able to actually provide for her. Now, we've had conversations. She's in her 20s now. She's married. She's doing well. I kicked her out. But those helped me go through and see what her priorities were, and helped her go through and express, kind of the peer pressure stuff of what she was sensing, right? So I felt humiliated because it was, you want to give everything, but yeah.
Thank you. And that was a good job of being vulnerable without being overly vulnerable, because we heard you. How many of us feel bad that we aren't able to give our kids more? Yeah, it's part of the parental experience. And these traffickers are out there, and they know it. And they're trying to get in between you and your daughter and give them something that you don't have. So as I roll all this together, I want to encourage you to look at your lives analytically, to recognize and understand when you are too focused on the humanity of something, because there are times where you have to put your head down and recognize you're just part of the machine, and suck it up, stop bitching. The other side of it is when you're too much of the hardware, which I think most of us in this room are. We become workaholics, and we lose sight of the bigger things. And as you think about that cycle of life, as we're approaching and moving towards wisdom and all these things that we're moving towards and trying to acquire, and this ambition, we start to lose our identity. You guys are developing more and more of an identity in the OSINT community. I'm excited to see where it goes. It can be integrated in all different places. And then lastly, think about those rituals. Develop those rituals. Recognize and understand the vulnerabilities of the people that you're working with and you're in a relationship with, and build them up and be a partner. Thank you very much. We have time for some questions at all from online.